Okay, thank you so much for joining us today for our Watch's Men in Focus presentation, in which I'll talk to you about the role that all men, in particular, can play in preventing men's violence against women. If you wish to access captions for today's session, please select the closed captions button in the Zoom menu on your device. If you do have any questions or require assistance, please use the chat function to send a message to our digital support person, Carmela. I assert the Jidingunj people's inalienable connection to and custodianship of the lands on which I live and work and am coming to you from today. I honour the elders past and present, and I commit to learning always about the joys of local Aboriginal culture, language, and practices, as well as acknowledging the past and ongoing injustices inflicted on Aboriginal people here and across Australia through the ongoing processes of colonisation. I would like to extend acknowledgement to the elders past and present of all the various different lands and country that you're all joining from today. And I acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining and those who have been resisting and advocating for decades and centuries to prevent and address violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and people of all genders, and to redress the ongoing injustices of colonisation. I'd also like to acknowledge the lived experience that informs this work and that is in the room today. I stand on the shoulders of countless women and victim survivors who have informed this work. My name is Cameron McDonald. My pronouns are he, him, and I am a sector engagement lead here at Our Watch. I have long, dark brown and grey hair, and I'm wearing a navy blue shirt. I come to this work with an appreciation of my mostly privileged experiences, being a cisgendered, heterosexual, non-Indigenous, neurotypical, university-educated, middle-class man. Another part of my story is that I've always been excluded from what's referred to as boys' clubs, being on the outer of spaces where dominant forms of masculinity prevail. Growing up, I did experience abuse and sexual harassment at the hands of other boys and men. Part of their rationale for treating me the way they did was that I was not man enough. Another part of my story is that I grew up in a family where emotional abuse was the norm and sibling violence was common. Yet another part of my story are the ways that I, a cisgendered heterosexual man, am complicit in sexist and gender unequal structures and social norms in society. So it's these and other personal experiences that motivate me to do the work that I do, that inform my positionality, and that remind me of the complexity of everyone's life stories. For anyone who is new to Our Watch, we are a national leader in the primary prevention of violence against women and their children in Australia. We work to embed gender equality and prevent violence where Australians live, learn, work, and socialise. We are an independent, not-for-profit organisation established in 2013 by the Victorian and Commonwealth governments, and since then all state and territory governments have joined as members. Today's presentation is grounded in the Men in Focus Practice Guide. I led the authoring of this guide that was published in 2022. It was built on the Men in Focus evidence review, which collated national and international evidence about what works to engage men and address masculinities in violence prevention initiatives. Its development was guided by a diverse and impressive group of advisors and peer reviewers, all of whom you can look up in the front pages of the guide itself. Colleagues of mine recently developed some fantastic new video resources and support guides and infographics to complement the practice guide. These, along with the guide itself, can be found via the link that is being shared in the chat. Being an Our Watch framework, of course, it builds on our strong evidence base and draws on the findings of change the story, changing the picture, and changing the landscape. It acknowledges that to end violence against women, men, of course, need to be involved, because while not all men perpetrate violence against women, all men can and should be part of the solution to preventing it, which is what we're here to explore today. Men in Focus offers strengths-based ways of working with men while keeping the work accountable to women. It acknowledges the fact that people's identities and life experiences are diverse and different people might experience discrimination, not just because of sexism, but also because of other structures and systems of oppression. Importantly, it honours the call to action from Changing the Picture that there is an important role for non-Indigenous people to play in challenging and transforming systems of colonisation and racism that lead to disproportionately high rates of violence experienced by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women. We know that men's violence against women is widespread across our society and touches the lives of many people. Therefore, it's likely that many of you watching today will have your own experiences of it. Supports are available if you want to chat with someone following our presentation today. You can contact 1-800-RESPECT or any of the other support services on screen at the moment, and we'll be posting more information about these in the chat for your reference. Today, you are being encouraged to participate during the session when we have interactive activities on the Slido platform. So please do have your smartphones ready, or you can also access these at the relevant time via your web browser. Feel free to ask questions via the Q&A function. I won't have the time to answer these myself live, but a fabulous colleague of mine, Hamish, is on standby to answer any questions that he can in writing. And we will also look at these after the session and follow up where possible. This presentation is designed to provide you with an introductory overview of Men in Focus in Practice by covering our shared vision for an equal and respectful world. We will discuss what a world without violence against women might be like, and we will showcase promising prevention practice from across Australia that demonstrates prevention is possible. We will talk briefly about the barriers to achieving this vision and what drives violence against women. And lastly, we will talk about what actions you can take to change the story and prevent men's violence against women in your work, your community, and your spheres of influence. Now, I would like to invite you to share your thoughts about what would a world that is equal, respectful, and safe for women and people of all genders look like, feel like, and sound like. And we will do this as our first Slido activity for the day. So on screen, there is a QR code. You can pull out your phone and use your phone camera to connect to the web browser to answer this question. Or you can go to slido.com on your computer, on your web browser, and type in that 7-numeral code, 3697443. And I can see that 6 people are in there already, which is great. And we just want to hear from you. What's your vision of what a world that's equal, respectful, and safe for women and people of all genders? What would that actually look like? What would it feel like? What would it sound like? Thank you. So we're starting to see some responses come in. It would be anxiety-free. It would be better for men too, because they would be able to express themselves more freely and have healthier relationships. Yep. It would be safe. There would be safety, harmony, less fear, greater connection, freedom, more harmonious, progressive, fair, joyful, peaceful and inclusive, a world where women and men could walk alone at night. Yep. People living their best lives, free to be myself, relaxed. A reduction in health and well-being outcome disparities across the community. It would be more human and less gendered. Yes, beautiful. It would be better for everyone. Yes. So this is brilliant. We've got lots of answers coming through and I can't do them all justice. What I will do after the session today is we can go into Slido and yeah, I can download all of these responses and we'll share, we'll do a follow-up email in the coming days because it is really helpful to see what our shared vision is. There's a lot of diversity here, but there's also some really common themes coming through. And of course, it's important for us to start an exercise like today, what you're committed to for the next hour, with painting a vision of what it is, what is the world that we're seeking, that we're working towards. A world where children are safe, women are not scared to be in their own home. Everyone would take more self-responsibility. There would be no violence. There would be more laughter and smiles. Okay, I'm gonna move on in a few more seconds. So if you're about to write something, please press submit. Because I think this will close off. Oh, there we go. Thank you. It would sound like women not being catcalled or harassed in the streets, being called harmful words. Yep, brilliant. Thank you. Now, that's the first of many of those Slido interactive polls we're going to have for today. So hopefully that was a good warm up, and you'll be ready and raring to go for the next one. So thank you. We saw some really common themes coming through there about safety, equality, but also it was really lovely to see that vision of joy and freedom for people to express themselves for who they are, free from rigid gender stereotypes. So that's great. It's great that that vision, there's so many shared elements, but also that there are unique elements to a vision as well. Our Watch, of course, has a vision, and this vision is an Australia where women and their children can live free from all forms of violence. Our goal is the end of violence against women and their children in Australia. And to do this, we need to address the underlying drivers of that violence using strategies that have been shown to work. And we need to do this on a scale that will create change for the whole of Australia. By increasing gender equality in our society, promoting equal and respectful relationships, and encouraging respectful, healthy forms of masculinity, we believe that we can shift the main drivers of violence against women. Over time and with sustained investment in prevention, this should result in a decrease in the prevalence of this violence. Now, unfortunately, we know that we've got a bit of a way to go to get to that vision. So next, we're going to do another Slido activity where I want to hear from you. What's your understanding of what you see as getting in the way? What stops us from achieving that vision that we just painted of a gender equal, discrimination-free society that's free from violence against women? Um, so I'll open up the Slido again and just want you to brainstorm the reasons that you're aware of for why violence against women occurs. Um, and so what's currently stopping us from achieving that vision? So some of you are in there already. That's great. It should just open up again in the same browser that you had open. But otherwise, we've got those details on how you can join if you hadn't had a chance to do that yet. So yeah, what's getting in the way? Toxic accountability, toxic masculinity, and maybe a lack of accountability. Yep, gender norms, men not speaking up, men not taking bystander action. Yep, patriarchy, men's entitlement, gender stereotypes is coming up a few times. Patriarchy is coming up a lot. Resistance, especially from large organizations. Yep, there's power and privilege and patriarchy again. An unhealthy digital world. Yeah, harmful gender norms and practices. Um, Sexism and gender equality, lack of education, the not my problem mindset, role models, entrenched cultures, a lack of understanding of gender inequity. Yeah. People not realizing and understanding what the problem actually is and maybe the extent of the problem. Preventative approach is not getting as much attention as responses. Yeah, colonization, historical cultural norms of patriarchy and lack of education, technology, unhealthy social media, seeing some themes there, systemic barriers, many males don't believe they need to change. No, it's not me, not all men, that argument. Thousands of years of history. Okay, I've got a very switched on audience here. I can tell you've got some really spot on um, understandings already of what's getting in the way and what's causing these problems. So again, I'll just give you a few more seconds to finish up sending through your really spot on reflections here. Pathologizing women and other marginalized groups. Yep. And so there's a real individualizing of the problem at times. Okay, I'm going to click forward now. So thank you. Given what what we just saw then in that activity, I can assume a really high level of knowledge already, I think, of what some of the causative factors are. So I will just whisk through this this part of the presentation because it seems like I think you know a lot of this already, and I will just whisk through it so that it does help us set the scene for understanding what the problem is, its prevalence, its impacts, so that we know what it is that we need to address. So, gender inequality in the evidence tells us that there is a strong relationship between inequality and levels of gender-based violence. This is because when women are valued less, violence against them seems more justified. And gender inequality is when men and women have unequal value in our society, and there is an unequal distribution of power, resources, and opportunity between them. Arguably, gender inequality is a form of violence in itself in that way. And violence is just the tip of the iceberg. There are many other forms of inequality and disrespect that women experience every day across Australia, many of which aren't captured by statistics. So the analogy on screen is of gender inequality as an iceberg. Above the water are the horrific outcomes resulting from gender inequality in the form of violence against women that we sometimes hear about and see in our media, for example, such as rape, murder, stalking, etc. These are things that can be reported, even though they might often not be. But underneath the surface sits all these other forms of gender inequality and violence that exist throughout our daily lives in places that we live, work, learn, and play, and contribute to this culture of violence against women that's normalized and accepted. Microaggressions and macroaggressions are common, and women will know all too well about these. Men, maybe less so. So, in a nutshell, gender inequality sets the underlying context in which men's violence against women can occur. Of course, gender is not the only factor to consider in understanding men's violence against women, both in its perpetration as well as how it's experienced by victim survivors, because women are not a homogenous group, of course, and different women's lives can be impacted not only by gender inequality, but by other forms of discrimination and oppression, such as colonialism, racism, ageism, classism, homophobia, and transphobia, for example. Think about the racism and sexism that women wearing hijab experience, or the discrimination by child protection, the police, and the media that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and men experience, or the rampant transphobia that is occurring in many parts of society right now. Likewise, for men, some men can simultaneously experience privilege due to their gender while also experiencing other forms of oppression due to their race, sexuality, socioeconomic status, physical ability, etc. Additionally, men and communities of men are gendered in particular ways. Some men are generalized and stereotyped as violent or hypermasculine, such as black men, while other men can be generalized and stereotyped as lacking masculinity, such as Asian men, for example. There is a hierarchy of men which centers the white, middle class, heterosexual, able bodied, neurotypical man as the most moderate and proper man and perceived to be just the right amount of man. So, when working with men, we must be attentive to these experiences and we need to simultaneously address all other forms of oppression at the same time as we are addressing sexism. While most men in Australia do not use violence, we know that it's men who perpetrate the majority of violence against people of all genders. In fact, around 95% of people who have experienced violence since the age of 15 experienced violence from a male perpetrator. And while people of all genders can be victims of violence, there are differences in how it's experienced based on gender. Public awareness of some of the forms that violence takes is slowly improving. For example, there has been a jump in awareness of coercive control, but some forms of violence remain more widely understood than others. And while we can be satisfied that rejecting violence against women is slowly becoming the norm in Australia, it is concerning that we are simultaneously seeing new and terrifying forms of violence against women, such as technology facilitated abuse, especially with the rise of AI, social media, and online spaces. And statistics show that violence happens to women across all socioeconomic backgrounds and in all communities across Australia at frighteningly high and common rates. So this is a problem everywhere, even though it might be experienced differently in different places. Because different groups of women experience violence more frequently and in more severe forms than other women, and they have less access to support services once they experience violence. And this is due to the ways in which our society condones violence against some women more than others. For example, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women experience the ongoing impacts of colonisation and racism, which cause them to experience higher rates and more severe forms of violence than other women. And while there's limited data on who's perpetrating that violence against women, against all women in this country, the little data that we do have suggests that at least half, if not more, of the violence perpetrated against Aboriginal women is by non-Aboriginal men. So it's not a cultural problem as such, and all people, especially non-Indigenous people, have an important role to play in ending this violence. Likewise, women with disabilities experience violence from a greater number of perpetrators, and our ableist society normalises that. Therefore, it's on all of us to challenge and transform the structures of ableism that drive this violence. A reminder that if you want any of the sources for these statistics, they can be found on our quick facts page via the link that has already been shared in the chat. And likewise, different groups of women experience additional and unique drivers of violence due to racism, homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, ageism, and other structures that discriminate against them. And on screen, we have, just as for example, LGBTIQA plus people, migrant and refugee women, and older women. When it comes to the impacts of violence against women, they are far-reaching, they can be lifelong, they impact women's health and well-being, as well as children's health and well-being, and they lead to housing precarity, and they have huge consequences, not just for individuals, but also across all aspects of our society. And a common thing you might hear is, well, what about men? So yes, men can and do experience a lot of violence in society as well. I can personally vouch for that, but there are key differences in the forms that it takes, where it occurs, who perpetrates it, and the impacts. Men are more likely to experience violence from another man who is a stranger, so someone who's unknown to them, and in a public place as a one-off incident. Whereas women are much more likely to experience violence from a man who is a current or former partner in a private place, and that is part of an ongoing pattern of abuse that results in ongoing fear or anxiety. And so while each woman's experience of violence, abuse, or harassment is unique, there are some distinct gendered patterns in the data that point to an epidemic of violence against women in Australia, which, like that in the rest of the world, is gendered in nature and overwhelmingly perpetrated by men. I could take this moment to acknowledge the binary language that I've been using and that we do use often. And if you want to read more about why we use that language, check out Men in Focus and Change the Story. And there are reasons for why we want to sort of speak to a majority of the population's experience, but we do simultaneously acknowledge the important work that LGBTIQA plus organisations, for example, are doing in showing some of the links, but also some of the unique experiences that LGBTIQA plus folks experience in violence, in gender-based violence. So preventing men's violence against women is complementary to and leads the way for preventing violence against people of all genders, which is why this work is for everyone. So that's all the bad news. The good news is that this violence is preventable. If we know the extent of the problem and what drives it, then we can know what actions we need to take to prevent it from happening in the first place. And given the current shockingly high rates of gender-based violence, crisis response and early interventions remain important and necessary more than ever. So these should be resourced far more than they currently are, as many advocates are currently advocating for. But if we only focus on responses to the violence, we will always be responding to the problem and not preventing it. So part of our vision is to stop these incidences from happening in the first place. And to do this, we need to treat the underlying causes of the problem in conjunction with addressing the symptoms. So we need to continue and expand our upstream efforts in the primary prevention approaches that are already springing up across the country. Prevention is about social change. So it seeks to change not only the damaging beliefs and behaviours of individuals, but also the social norms, the structures and practices of communities, organisations, and institutions. It is an ambitious long-term approach because we know that primary prevention takes time, money, and resources to change policies and systems and structures. So I acknowledge the interest that you all have in being a part of this social change project, which is why you do what you already do and why you're here today. So what is prevention? In this video, Australian property developer Mirvac, which operates in a very male-dominated sector, showcase what they are doing to prevent violence against women within their own sphere of influence. And it's part of this wonderful series of videos that we've started putting out this year called This is Prevention, where we are showcasing really brilliant prevention initiatives that are happening across the social spectrum. So this video goes for about 1.5 minutes and is one great example of what prevention looks like.
People have the right to feel safe at work, be engaged and productive in their workplace, and getting through barriers like sexual harassment enables that to happen.
Mirvac's taking action to prevent workplace sexual harassment, much like we've taken action to prevent physical safety and physical incidents on site.
We do have a very specific induction process that touches on respect at work and how we expect people to behave. It really drives the message to our surveys that these types of behaviours are going to be tolerated on our sites. The key for us now is to make sure our staff live by those rules and responsibilities.
If you can prevent the sexual harassment taking place in the first place, you can avoid all of the harmful impacts that that has on the individual victim, on the workplace dynamics, and the broader community.
I think it's about having an environment where people feel safe to speak up and call out that bad behaviour, where people feel supported, that there are no adverse repercussions, and the issue isn't just swept under the rug. For me personally, it's an expectation that Mirvac or any other business commits to this, and I wouldn't work anywhere that didn't commit to making a difference and having a workplace free of sexual harassment.
So another key part of the evidence base that I'll skip through, assuming your knowledge here, are the gender drivers of violence against women, which are the key to identifying and understanding the most common and pernicious expressions of gender inequality that drive violence against women. Men in Focus and Change the Story obviously provide more depth on these. By understanding and identifying them where we see them in society, we can take appropriate measures to counter or oppose them. And this is what we call taking essential actions. And for example, on screen, you'll see essential action 1 is to challenge the condoning of violence against women. To do that, we must change attitudes, beliefs, behaviours, systems and practices in our society that do continue to justify, to excuse, to trivialise or downplay violence against women and their children, or that shift blame from the perpetrator to the victim. So, for example, it needs to be normalised for boys and men to resolve conflict in non-violent ways. And there must be accountability for men's sexism and use of violence anywhere in society, and especially in our highest institutions. And workplaces must take measures to prevent sexual harassment in order to not be condoning violence against women on their workplace sites. Essential action 2 is around decision-making in private relations and in the public sphere, and how this needs to be shared so that it's not just men holding the power and control over important decisions. So we need to challenge and transform outdated stereotypes that assert men's need to be in control, to always be the leaders or the breadwinners. And we need more women from diverse backgrounds in positions of power, making decisions that affect them and their communities. Action 3 is that we need to transform these outdated gender stereotypes that are rigid, that are binary, that are hierarchical, that are harmful and restrictive, such as that men should be naturally aggressive and dominant and women should be naturally passive and submissive. We know that these have strong links to gender-based violence, and they result in policing and punishments for people when they don't conform to their expected gender roles. We also know that men who rigidly conform to these rigid stereotypes are more likely to perpetrate violence against people of all genders, and they're less likely to intervene when they witness problematic, sexist and violent attitudes and behaviours. There are a growing number of programs doing this really well, and I'll talk about some of these examples shortly. And lastly, we do acknowledge that men's relationships with other men can be a positive source of support, comfort, and celebration. But sometimes these peer relationships can be characterized by aggression, dominance, control, hypersexuality, homophobia, and other stereotypical behaviors as a form of bonding and to prove one's manliness. Those boys' clubs I spoke about earlier. So in these instances, cultures and behaviors of men's violence against women are more likely. So we need to continue promoting male peer relationships that are not only respectful, but that support men to be better and to be better advocates and aspiring allies to ending gender-based violence. Again, I'll highlight some examples of these later, including new father programs and whole of school respectful relationships education programs. In closing, for something to be primary prevention, it must be explicitly addressing at least one of these essential actions in ways that engage whole populations rather than just at-risk groups. And there are many ways of taking these actions in different parts of our world that, taken together, address social norms, practices, and structures at all levels of our society. Now, I'm hoping you've heard of the Manbox research already. If not, we'll put a link to it in the chat for you. But the research adds further evidence to support, especially drivers 3 and 4 of men's violence against women. And while the research is helpful because it shows that a significant but concerning minority of men in Australia continue to agree with outdated stereotypes of how men should be and behave, which we know are closely linked to men's perpetration of violence against women, we know that these attitudes also lead to higher likelihood of undertaking risk-taking behaviours and for men to have their own poor mental health outcomes. So while the good news is that a majority of men don't agree with these rules, the bad news is that a lot of men still feel pressured to conform to them, even if they don't believe in them. And what's worse is that even fewer men are actually taking action to challenge these attitudes and behaviours when they are confronted by them, even though a majority of men would be happy and supportive if they saw someone else calling out these behaviours. So the Jesuit Social Services and Respect Victoria released last year a really brilliant bit of research that helps us think about how we can support men and boys to take more action, and it's called Willing, Confident and Capable. And more recently, Respect Victoria released a delightful new video campaign titled What Kind of Man Do You Want to Be? Check them both out. They're really wonderful and positive additions to these approaches that we know need to be taken. We do also acknowledge the important role that programs in early intervention, response, children's safety, mental health, alcohol, drug and other substances, gambling, all those sorts of programs. We acknowledge the important role they play in preventing further violence and harm from occurring. And in Change the Story, these are acknowledged as reinforcing factors. But we also know that addressing these factors on their own will not prevent all forms of violence against women. Yet it's essential that actions are taken to address these reinforcing factors across all levels of society. And we do support actions and further investment in these areas. And we support and learn from the work led by individuals and organisations with expertise in these areas. And like the drivers of violence against women, there are complementary supporting actions that we advocate need to be taken to address those reinforcing factors. And these are all talked about more in Change the Story. I have talked a bit today about taking whole of approaches and working across all levels of society. So on screen, we've got the socio-ecological model, which helps us visualise how primary prevention work needs to be undertaken in complementary and reinforcing ways across all levels of society in order for that long-term sustained change we're looking for. So yes, we do need to continue working with individuals and groups of men, but we need to expand and amplify our work at those higher levels much, much more in order to change the structures the systems and the institutions and the social norms in our society that we know continue to uphold gender inequality. Now that we can see there is a role for everyone to play, let's talk about how we can play that role in the most ethical and effective way possible. And that's where Our Watch's Men in Focus evidence review explored national and international evidence for what works. And from this extensive analysis, 5 guiding principles emerged. And these were turned into practice recommendations and examples in the Men in Focus practice guide, which I'll come to in a moment. But before I do, it's time for another reflective activity. And I want to ask you, why should men care? Why should men care about men's violence against women? And why should they care enough, do you think, to get more involved in taking action to prevent men's violence against women? So this is another Slido, which again should open up in that browser if you've got it there. Otherwise, take another photo or join on your browser. And I'd love to hear from you why you think it is important for men to care and for men to be active in preventing violence against women. For the inherent value of women as people, yes. It helps to keep men healthier too. Yep. So there are benefits for men. We don't like to lead with that, but yes, there are definitely are. It sets a standard amongst other men. Yes, there's no reason we can't be leaders and set that standard. Women are human beings. Empathy. Seeing women beyond being objects to keep women in their lives safe. It will benefit men. Anyone who has humanity should care. It would lead to a healthier society, a fairer and better world. Men, we have a role as role models to accept accountability and remove that accountability from women and gender diverse people. Yeah, I think of the mental load for one thing. Public health costs, yep. For their mothers, sisters, wives, daughters. Men will listen to other men sometimes, yep. Men, definitely we need to play an important role in curbing the impacts of toxic masculinity. Connection and care are stronger than dominance and control. I love that, yes. Living together, a human right, because this is how change happens. Yes. Because the liberty of men is tied up in the liberty of all. There's some really beautiful reflections here. Thank you. And I wish I didn't have to move on from this so long. I would love to sit in this reflective space for longer. But like I said, I'm really looking forward to downloading all of these and sharing them with you in the coming days, because there's a reason to this. These reflections that you're sharing, the why should men care? Why should men get involved? It is an important step we need to take because, let's face it, the current context and the climate that we're in are that not enough men do seem to care to take action. So what do we need to do to change that? So when men are ambivalent to their role, they can't see the importance of their role, we need to go back to this space and work with why they should care before we move into the what they should do and how they should do it. So thank you. I'm going to click forward in a second, and I'm sorry, I hope you can't hear that whippersnapper. My neighbours have decided to mow the lawn right now. All right, thank you. That's really wonderful. Thanks for your thoughts and reflections on that topic. So now, as promised, I will talk about the 5 guiding principles that form the backbone of Men in Focus. And these are on screen as intersectional approaches, gender transformative, accountable to women, strengths-based, and solutions across all levels of society. They provide the how-to for this work in conjunction with the essential actions. They are interconnected, and they provide a roadmap to address the key challenges of this work. They can be used as the building blocks for developing new primary prevention initiatives, and they can be used to reflect on existing initiatives to see the strengths of an initiative and where there might be room for development. So let's explore them one by one with some practical examples. First up is maintaining accountability to women. These principles are all important, of course, but this one is even more pertinent when we talk about the role of men and masculinities in prevention. We do need more men to be doing this work, but of course, men's allyship needs to be done in ways that are intentional and accountable to the diversity of women's experiences. So mechanisms need to be in place to ensure that men don't unknowingly enact the drivers of violence that they might be working to dismantle. We do need to have safe enough processes that allow for courageous conversations to occur so that when we do, in the messiness of human endeavour, unintentionally replicate the beliefs and attitudes that enable violence, men can be invited into accountability. So as men becoming more interested in doing this work, we do need to acknowledge the decades-long work of feminists in this space, centuries-long even for Indigenous women. Women have been leading the work of challenging and transforming patriarchal structures that cause harm to people of all genders. So there is a wealth of theory and evidence and frameworks for what actually works to end gender-based violence that men simply must engage with. And we must challenge that knight in shining armour cliche of men coming in to save the day. So a great example of how accountability to women looks in practice is a place-based program in New South Wales, where accountability has been implemented in a very deliberate and structural way to develop a number of grassroots violence prevention and allyship projects in the region. After receiving training in key areas of prevention, local men were supported to develop their own prevention projects, which they went on to deliver in their communities. Now, the important part is the development of these projects was guided by the Working Together with Men model, developed by Shelley Houston Munro, a link to which we'll share in the chat, which involved the men pitching their ideas to an accountability panel of women and intentionally opening themselves up to receiving constructive and rigorous feedback about their ideas. Importantly, intersectional representation was centred in the accountability panel by including 2 First Nations women, one of them a traditional custodian of the local area, and 2 queer women, with one woman being both queer and First Nations. So this created an effective way of channeling inspiration and awareness raising into action, and action of the sort that women were able to guide and strengthen. Now, when we've heard facilitators speak about the power of these accountability panels, it's been really wonderful to hear how transformative the process itself has been, particularly for many of the women who've never had that experience of being listened to by men, welcoming feedback on their allyship initiatives before. Next, we have gender transformative approaches, which examine, question, and transform outdated gender stereotypes, relations, and structures that are harmful to people of all genders. So they promote more expansive and less limiting ideas of masculinity that are grounded in equality and respect. And this work focuses on the socialization of men and boys. It challenges binary thinking, and it seeks change beyond awareness raising towards shifts in structures, policies, and practices that uphold gender inequality. And a great example of this of a program that embodies this is Baby Makes 3. Baby Makes 3 is a whole of system initiative that aims to support equal and respectful relationships as families transition to parenthood. In Victoria, the group-based program for first-time parents is commonly delivered through maternal and child health services and has been adapted for antenatal settings and interstate partners, demonstrating its flexibility across different service contexts. It's delivered by trained mixed-gender facilitation teams who model equality in practice, and the program supports first-time parents to build understanding, appreciation, and collaborative parenting. Alongside delivery of the group-based program for parents, Baby Makes 3 does organisational capacity building and systems level work with councils, with health services and community organisations to embed gender equality principles into practice for sustainable large-scale change. It's been co-designed with communities including Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families, rainbow families, families from diverse cultural and racial backgrounds, as well as people living in regional areas, to ensure cultural relevance and inclusivity. Evaluations indicate improved parent awareness of how gendered roles shape families, enhanced support for equality between partners, and greater engagement with gender equitable parenting practices because of engagement with the initiative. And so you can see on screen there's Essential Action 3, which is doing a really great job of addressing, along with other actions, and how it's working at different levels of that social ecology. Intersectional approaches. We know that not all men are the same. There are numerous expressions of masculinity. So we want primary prevention initiatives to embrace these differences and to promote truly diverse expressions of masculinity, especially ones that are discriminated against and that might also act as really positive counters to outdated and dominant masculine stereotypes. Now, it can be hard working intersectionally when our structures and our systems in our society are still so monolithic. Nevertheless, community initiatives are the driving force for promoting the vision of the world that we want to create, where all people can live free from rigid stereotypes. And a really wonderful example of this is a prevention initiative in New South Wales, run by an LGBTQIA+ organisation that does this superbly in two different ways. On the one hand, it does work within the LGBTQIA+ community to promote healthy, respectful, and diverse relationships, because, of course, gender-based violence can be present in rainbow relationships. And it does this through really wonderful social media campaigns and its website with resources that anyone can use. They also run community and group programs on the ground that engage people face to face. Now, simultaneously, this program offers opportunities to people and practitioners in the mainstream population who can access the social media resources and professional development opportunities to incorporate challenging homophobia, transphobia, biphobia, colonialism, and racism into their own work and their own lives. In this way, everyone's invited to not only see how prevalent homophobia and transphobia is and how impactful and harmful they are, but also to see the role that we can all play in challenging and transforming them. I know as a cis het man myself, I found it so transformative and joyful for me to challenge transphobia and homophobia in a way that is part of a broader project of challenging and transforming rigid gender stereotypes and structures and the whole gender binary, which is harmful to everyone. And by deconstructing it, everyone benefits. So in this way, to see my struggle for liberation as a cisgender heterosexual guy is most avowedly tied up with the struggle for LGBTIQA+ folks to live their lives free from hate and oppression. It is actually a universal struggle for all people to be free to be themselves, free from the limitations and impediments of outdated and rigid gender stereotypes. Now, to talk about solutions across all levels of society, I have introduced this concept already. So just to go into a little bit more detail about how our initiatives need to work in complementary ways at all different levels of society. And an example, practical example to talk through to demonstrate how this work complements is if we're going to address gender inequality in both the public and domestic spheres. For example, men in cis-het relationships need to undertake more unpaid domestic labour in parenting and caring roles. Now, we know that some men already are doing this or want to be able to do this more, maybe to be more active fathers, for example, while other men might still need to understand why it is important that they do more and how it relates to gender equality and prevention of violence. So to support this happening, workplaces need to have sufficient policies, leave entitlements and flexible working arrangements that encourage men to take on more of these caring roles in their personal lives. And now, even though this has started happening in many workplaces, our social norms are actually behind because research suggests that many men are still not taking their leave or applying for flexible work arrangements due to perceptions about how this will impact their career progression or how it might make them look slack. Therefore, we need to simultaneously transform attitudes that persist about the gendered nature of care and unpaid domestic labour. And we need to remove that gendered association with these tasks to get all men to see the importance of doing their share. And we need to start young. We need to challenge the outdated gender stereotypes that we place on children based on their sex at birth. Boys should be allowed to dress how they want, to cry, and for that to be okay, to play with dolls, and to foster their gentleness and their caring natures. Likewise, value shouldn't be placed on how pretty girls are, and we should challenge how society socialises girls to be more attentive to the needs of others rather than their own. Girls should be able to play sport and to play with trucks and construction toys so that girls and boys can be free to choose their path in life, free from gender stereotypes and expectations. So in this example, you can see how encouraging men to play a more active role in equal parenting and caring is connected to changes needed across all levels of society. And in this way, everyone has a role to play, from fathers, uncles, grandfathers, people in community services, people in management, HR roles in workplaces, maternal child health services, early childhood, all levels of education, people in government, and people in advertising, marketing, and communication roles. The Champions of Change Coalition is just one example of many that's doing work in the workplace to try and challenge and change these social norms. And in this program, members are called champions, not because they're perfect, but because they publicly commit to leading practical, constructive and disruptive actions to accelerate change in their settings. By formally engaging leaders, especially those with the power to drive change, it's critical to address the systemic and societal issues relating to gender equality. So the work of this coalition focuses on shifting the systems of gender inequality in the workplace, and it's backed by a proven methodology for increasing the representation of women in organisations and developing the conditions and cultures that enable them to thrive. And now to talk about strengths-based approaches, the great thing about doing this work with men is that research consistently tells us that most men do actually believe that women and girls are entitled to equality and should be able to feel safe and live free from violence. So it's these values which are commonly held in society that we need to work with. Now, the issue is that a lot of men just might not necessarily always know the extent of the problems and the issues that women and girls face, nor the role that they as men can in fact play as individuals in changing society and addressing these issues at a broader level, not just in their personal relationships. So this is where it becomes really important, the way that we talk about the issues and the ways in which we build men's intrinsic motivation. So going back to that last exercise we did, how can we build that motivation for men to care enough to act, and then to act in coordinated and complementary ways to be part of this whole of society approach? So at Our Watch, we're excited to be able to connect with so many people from across the country running all these excellent and diverse strengths-based initiatives with men and masculinities in prevention. So if I were to pick just one as an example, it would be an Aboriginal-led community initiative that's based in the Northern Territory that takes a whole of community approach. It's called No More, and it works with sporting clubs, community organisations, councils, and more recently businesses to inspire community-led action using an asset-based community development approach. It works with groups to develop their own domestic violence action plans with simple, practical ideas for change developed and led by the community. So it builds community capacity, it establishes and supports men's groups, provides education, and it encompasses a dynamic process of change through developing community leadership, responsibility, and action. It uses the power of elders to set the tone and to establish the social norming to change men's behaviours and attitudes. And in particular, it uses sport as a vehicle to connect with groups of men in settings that are familiar to them, settings that feel open, non-judgmental, supportive, and culturally safe. And it's endorsed by high-level Indigenous influencers and supported by a great social media marketing campaign. So it incorporates principles of values-based messaging to activate values necessary for social change, such as universalism, social justice, equality, and benevolence. It provides positive visions of what dignified, respectful masculinities actually look like, which involve caring for community, caring for family, and care for country. And last, but certainly not least, is The Line. The Line is an absolutely incredible, fun, collaborative, youth-informed, award-winning primary prevention, social marketing, behavioural change campaign from Our Watch that helps young people aged 14 to 20 to negotiate healthy, respectful, and consensual relationships. It works with influencers to reach young people where they're at online, to promote positive, evidence-based messages and boost them up young people's feeds. So it's taking essential actions 4, but also 1 and 3, and working at different levels of the social ecology there, at the individual and relationship level, but also at the societal level to change culture. It's got hundreds of articles, quizzes, clips, and interviews with and for young people on topics such as masculinity, pornography, gender, power and privilege, sexting, and more. Please check it out via the links we're sharing in the chat, and in particular their current campaign called The Comfort Zone, and a new campaign that's just launched in collaboration with the Macquarie Dictionary on defining sex, dating, and relationship buzzwords. Now, we're fast approaching time, so thank you everyone for your engagement today. In closing, just like to reiterate these key messages that even though men's violence against women is highly prevalent and impactful, it's preventable. We just need to know what drives it, so we know what appropriate actions we can take to prevent it from happening in the first place, and making sure the actions that we take are informed and guided by these guiding principles for ethical and effective practice. So while not all men are violent, all men do have important roles to play in preventing violence against women, and actions need to be taken across all levels of society. And we need to not just be addressing gender inequality and sexism, but also colonialism, racism, ableism, homophobia, transphobia, ageism, and classism. Long-term commitment is required with greater resourcing and a more strengthened authorising environment across state, territory, and federal jurisdictions. So just in closing, I'd love for you to take 1 minute to think about one action that you will take to continue on your primary prevention journey, especially to help bring other people, especially men, along. If you feel like sharing this in the Slido, that would be most welcome. But you can also just keep this as a personal, private reflection and rumination. And while you're taking the time to do this, my friends, can you please share the link in the chat to our feedback survey? Because as we wrap up today, I would like to just say that your feedback is really helpful to us and important. And if you could open that link on your browser to do, it'll just take 5 minutes. You can do it straight after the session or in the next 24 hours would be really welcome. So it's really wonderful seeing these actions roll in. I don't want to click forward to close it off yet. I'll leave it open, and if you've already shared your action, if you could please take a moment to click on that feedback link and open that up. And we'll also share some other links in the chat about other ways you can keep in contact with us at Our Watch, stay across the work that we're doing via our website and our socials. And we'll also reshare those support numbers if you did want to talk to someone about anything that's come up for you via today's session. So I'm about to click forward. Really great to see some of these actions that you're committing to, like calling out sexism, sharing resources, creating awareness in your broader spheres of influence. That's just brilliant. Thank you. Okay, we're approaching time, so I better click forward and just to say there is the QR code for our feedback if you want to do that on your phone. Otherwise, thank you so much for your time today. I've really loved seeing all your interaction in the Slido, and I can't wait to look at those in more depth shortly. For more information about Men in Focus, we've got our web link there on the page, and you can also email us at training@ourwatch.org.au if you've got any further questions. Thank you all, go well, and I hope you've got something nourishing and uplifting to do with your afternoon, and look forward to being in touch and continuing to work together. Thank you. Bye for now.